The shocking truth behind Daniel Boone's frontier adventures. Daniel Boone, a name that echoes with heroism, courage, and the spirit of the American frontier. For generations, he has been remembered as the fearless woodsman who carved paths through untamed wilderness, leading settlers into a new world. Children grew up with tales of his adventures, while his image became a symbol of bravery and freedom. But what if the man behind the legend was far more complicated and far more tragic than the myth we've been told? Before we reveal the hidden truths, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring more untold stories and forgotten legends back to life. Because the truth is, Boone's story was not one of endless triumph. Behind the buckskin clothing and heroic portraits lies a man who endured devastating losses, betrayal by his own government, and a life where survival often came at a terrible cost. His legend may shine bright, but the reality was marked by shadows. Today, we peel back the layers of myth and uncover the shocking truth behind Daniel Boone's frontier adventures. And what you'll discover may change the way you see this American icon forever. Daniel Boone is often introduced as the very image of the American frontier hero. In paintings, he appears as a tall, rugged man in buckskin clothes, musket slung over his shoulder, eyes fixed on distant horizons. School books describe him as a pioneer who carved the wilderness road to the Cumberland Gap, opening Kentucky to settlement. His life seemed to embody independence and courage, making him larger than life in the nation's imagination. Yet this heroic image was carefully crafted, polished, and passed down until it became the version almost everyone knows today. The popular legend speaks of Boone as the man who single-handedly braved forests, rivers, and endless dangers to bring civilization into a wild land. Children's adventure stories portrayed him fighting off wolves, outsmarting bandits, and defeating Native American warriors in thrilling duels. He was the archetype of bravery, calm under pressure, and guided by an unshakable sense of purpose. His frontier skills were legendary, from hunting to tracking, and his leadership supposedly made him a beacon for settlers moving westward. To many, he wasn't just a man, he was a symbol of America's destiny. This idealized Boone was more than just a character in folk tales. He became a national symbol during the 19th century, when the young United States was desperate for heroes to embody its values. Writers and politicians elevated his story into myth, turning him into a larger-than-life figure. Boone's struggles were minimized and his failures quietly erased. Instead, what remained was a pure, heroic tale. The brave frontiersman guiding families through danger, standing tall against adversity, and never losing his way. It was a legend carefully curated to inspire, not to reveal. But even in this shining version, hints of tension appear. Boone was often described as restless, never fully satisfied with settlement, always searching for new lands beyond the horizon. This gave him an aura of mystery, as though he belonged more to the wilderness than to civilization itself. In children's tales, this wanderlust was romanticized, but to those who looked closer, it suggested a deeper unease. Why would a man so celebrated for building homes and roads constantly abandon them? Why was the hero always fleeing the very world he helped to create? And here lies the first fracture in the perfect story. The Boone immortalized in paintings and books may have inspired a nation, but beneath the myth was a man whose life was anything but simple. The very qualities that made him a symbol, his courage, his leadership, his search for freedom, were tied to sacrifices, betrayals, and tragedies that most Americans never heard about. If the legend was golden, the reality was far darker. And to understand that truth, we must step away from the myth and into the shadows of Boone's real frontier life. The 18th century was a time of relentless expansion. Colonists from the East pressed further into territories that were already home to powerful Native American nations. For settlers, the wilderness was a land of promise, rich with resources and fertile ground. For indigenous peoples, it was their ancestral homeland, now threatened by outsiders with muskets, axes, and ambitions. Boone's fame grew from this clash of worlds, where opportunity for some meant devastation for others. His name became attached not only to exploration, but to the wider story of conflict that defined America's westward push. Kentucky, where Boone led settlers, was called the Dark and Bloody Ground. It was not an empty wilderness waiting to be claimed, but a contested landscape where Shawnee, Cherokee, and other tribes fought fiercely to defend their land. Boone's journey into these areas was never a peaceful adventure. It was a march into the heart of violence. While the popular story presented him as a brave guide, the reality was that every step forward meant confrontation, ambushes, and blood spilled on both sides. His legend softened these struggles, but those who lived them knew the cost was far from heroic. Yet Boone himself did not reap endless rewards from his efforts. In fact, he often lost more than he gained. Land speculators and corrupt officials cheated him out of property, leaving him nearly penniless despite being hailed as a pioneer. Imagine the bitter irony. A man celebrated as a father of Kentucky left with little to show for it. This twist in his story reveals that Boone was not just a triumphant figure, but a victim of the very expansion he helped drive. His dream of freedom was continually shadowed by betrayal and financial ruin. His personal life, too, carried heavy burdens. Boone's family endured raids, kidnappings, and tragedies that rarely appear in polished versions of the story. His daughter Jemima was captured by Native Americans, and though rescued, the incident revealed the constant peril faced by frontier families. Boone himself was once taken prisoner and adopted into a Shawnee tribe, living months among them before escaping. Far from being an untouchable hero, he was a man pulled between two worlds, admired by some, despised by others, and never fully secure in either. And here lies a deeper context. Boone was not simply a hero standing above history. He was entangled in it, caught in the tides of colonial ambition, indigenous resistance, and a government eager to turn him into a symbol while ignoring his struggles. The story of Daniel Boone is not just about one man's courage, but about a nation built on conflict, myth-making, and selective memory. And as we peel back another layer, we see the cracks widening between the legend and the harsh, unvarnished truth. Behind the polished legend, Daniel Boone's real life was marked by hardship and brutality. The frontier was not a stage for endless triumphs, but a place where survival often meant sacrifice. Boone endured hunger, exhaustion, and the constant threat of attack. He was no untouchable hero. He bled, lost, and grieved like any other man. His family suffered deeply, living under the constant shadow of violence. These details rarely appeared in children's tales or patriotic songs, but they formed the reality of Boone's existence. The heroic mask concealed scars that were never meant to inspire, only to endure. One of the most shocking episodes came in 1778, when Boone was captured by the Shawnee. Instead of immediate execution, he was adopted into the tribe, given a place among them, and treated as family. For months, Boone lived between two identities, frontier settler and Shawnee tribesman. It was an experience that blurred the lines between enemy and kin. The popular stories later painted this as a daring escape, but the truth is more complicated. Boone had learned to live among those he was told to fight. This uncomfortable reality clashed with the image of the unwavering frontier hero. When he returned, Boone was not greeted as a triumphant survivor. Instead, suspicion fell on him. Some settlers whispered that he had turned traitor, that he had grown too close to the Shawnee. Even his rescue of fellow captives did not silence the doubts. The irony is painful. While later generations would worship Boone as a flawless icon, his own neighbors once questioned his loyalty. The man celebrated as a guardian of the frontier had been accused of being its betrayer. This twist reveals the fragile line between hero and outcast. Boone's later years were no happier. Land disputes consumed him, stripping away property he believed he had earned. He moved further west, chasing the horizon yet again, searching for peace that never came. Unlike the fairy tale ending of prosperity and honor, Boone's twilight years were marked by poverty and displacement. The very land he opened for others was denied to him. The grand pioneer died not as a triumphant conqueror, but as a restless wanderer, far from the security his legend promised. His story, stripped of romantic gloss, is one of loss more than glory. And here lies the revelation the myth never told. Daniel Boone was not the perfect frontier hero. He was a man torn between cultures, betrayed by his own nation, haunted by tragedy, and ultimately consumed by the very wilderness he once seemed to master. His adventures were shocking not because they proved his invincibility, but because they revealed his vulnerability. To understand Boone is not to worship him, but to see him clearly, for in his struggles lies the darker truth of America's frontier dream. Daniel Boone's story, when stripped of its heroic polish, takes on the form of myth filled with trials and silences. Each hardship he faced, captivity, betrayal, poverty, mirrors the archetypal hero's journey. But in Boone's case, the victories were hollow. The trials became less about triumph and more about endurance. His silence in the face of loss speaks volumes, revealing a man who carried grief without glory. Boone's struggles, retold symbolically, reflect the cost of chasing freedom in a land where survival demanded sacrifice at every step. The captivity among the Shawnee is one of the most powerful symbols. Rather than portray him only as a victim, this moment reveals a man suspended between two worlds. His adoption into the tribe symbolizes the fragile boundary between enemy and kin, self and other. Boone's silence about what he truly felt during those months is haunting. Was he torn between loyalty and belonging, or did he glimpse a different way of life that contradicted everything he was taught? The unanswered questions turn his story into something far deeper than a tale of escape. Boone's restless wanderings can also be read symbolically. He became a figure always searching, never settled, forever haunted by the horizon. This trait, celebrated as adventurous spirit, could just as easily reflect inner exile. Perhaps he was not only fleeing wilderness, but also fleeing himself, his failures, losses, and doubts. His myth presents this restlessness as courage, yet in silence it reveals the torment of a man who never found home. The frontier became less a place of conquest and more a mirror of his own unresolved struggle. Even his financial ruin carries symbolic weight. Boone opened pathways that others exploited, yet he remained empty-handed. It is the story of America itself. The pioneer, a sacrificial figure, whose labor enriches others while he is left behind. This silence around his downfall is telling, because a legend cannot afford to show its hero broken. Yet in that silence lies the truth of countless forgotten pioneers, erased so that a polished myth could shine. Boone becomes not just a man, but a symbol of how nations build glory on hidden suffering. In the end, the myth of Daniel Boone is not only about courage in the wilderness. It is about trials endured without reward, silences that conceal more than they reveal, and a man who became both hero and ghost in his own lifetime. His story forces us to ask, what do we sacrifice when we turn men into myths? And what truths are lost when silence becomes more powerful than memory? These questions linger, demanding answers a legend never intended to give. The legend of Daniel Boone is often remembered as a shining tale of courage, a man who carved civilization out of wilderness. Yet when we strip away the polished stories, what remains is a human life marked by loss, betrayal, and restless searching. Boone's adventures were not victories neatly tied with bows. They were struggles that often ended without reward. His courage was real, but so was his suffering. This contrast forces us to reconsider what makes someone a hero. Is it the myth we build around them, or the scars they carried through life? In Boone's silence, we find the deeper truth. He never sought to be the icon the nation later made him. Instead, he endured trials that left him with more questions than answers. His wanderings, his captivity, and his financial ruin show us a man who never truly found peace. Yet these cracks in the legend reveal something powerful. A reminder that even the strongest symbols are built on fragile human lives. Boone's story was shocking not because it was full of glory, but because it was full of shadows. And yet, the myth continues to inspire. The image of Boone guiding settlers through the wilderness persists in art, literature, and memory. Perhaps this is a true paradox. The nation needed his myth more than it wanted his reality. His life, with all its flaws and darkness, was reshaped to fit a narrative of triumph. The man disappeared, but the legend remained. This manipulation says as much about America as it does about Boone himself. The frontier hero was as much invention as truth. So what do we take from Daniel Boone's story today? That courage is never simple. That freedom often comes at terrible cost. That legends can inspire, but they can also deceive. Boone's life reminds us that the past is not always what we are told, and that behind every polished hero, there may be a man burdened with silence. The shocking truth behind his frontier adventures is not one of endless triumph, but survival in a world unwilling to reward those who risked everything. And as we close his story, we invite you to reflect with us. What other legends might hold truths we've overlooked? If you found this journey through Boone's real-life eye-opening, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. More hidden stories and dark truths are on the way. And if you want to go even deeper, consider becoming a member to support our work. You'll gain access to exclusive content and help us bring more untold revelations to light. Because behind every legend, there's always another truth waiting to be uncovered.